Keanu Reeves stepped out of the supermarket, his hands full with a few bags of groceries. The golden hues of the setting sun stretched across the Los Angeles skyline, painting the sky in warm shades of amber and rose. A gentle evening breeze rustled the palm trees, blending the scents of fresh produce and warm pavement. For Keanu, it was just another quiet day, one of those rare moments when he could enjoy a simple task without the glare of Hollywood following him. As he walked toward his car, his thoughts drifted to the night ahead. Maybe he'd watch an old classic, something comforting, something slow and thoughtful. But just as he reached into his pocket for his car keys, he felt it, a faint but unmistakable tug at the sleeve of his jacket. Turning around, Keanu's gaze fell upon a little girl, no older than 6, with golden blonde hair falling over her shoulders and a pink dress that looked slightly wrinkled as if she'd been running. Her small fingers gripped the fabric of his jacket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her blue eyes were wide with fear, shimmering under the parking lot lights. Keanu crouched down, setting his grocery bags aside. He gave her a gentle smile, trying not to startle her. "Hey there," he said softly. "Are you okay?" The girl trembled, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Her tiny chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath shaky. It was as though she had been running for her life. Then, just as Keanu was about to ask again, she finally whispered 3 words that sent a chill down his spine. "She's not my aunt." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The distant hum of car engines faded, the voices of passers-by blurred. Keanu blinked, processing what he had just heard. Before he could react, a voice cut through the air, sharp and syrupy sweet. "There you are!" A woman approached them, her high heels clicking against the pavement. She was blonde, dressed in a light blue blouse and jeans, her hair tied into a tight bun. Her smile was broad, friendly, even rehearsed, but her eyes told a different story. They weren't warm, they were cold, calculating. Keanu stood slowly, positioning himself between the woman and the little girl. The girl shrank back, gripping his jacket even tighter. "Thank you so much for staying with her," the woman continued, reaching for the child's arm. "She gets nervous sometimes. I'm her aunt." Keanu didn't move. His instincts had been honed over years in the industry. He knew how to read people. And this woman? Something was off. "Is she okay?" he asked, glancing down at the child, who had not spoken another word. She just stared at the ground, stiff as a board. "Yes, of course," the woman laughed lightly. "She's just a little shaken up because she got lost. Right, sweetheart?" The girl didn't respond. Keanu crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "What's her name?" The woman hesitated for a fraction of a second, so brief that most wouldn't have noticed. But Keanu did. "Sophie," she answered quickly, too quickly. Keanu looked down at the girl, no reaction, no recognition, no relief, just fear. Something was very, very wrong. Keanu's gaze hardened, his body tensing ever so slightly. The woman's smile remained, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Something that told him she knew she had slipped. "Hey, Sophie," Keanu said, his voice deliberately gentle as he crouched again to her level. "Is that your name?" The little girl's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but she barely moved. Her fingers clutched onto his sleeve with an urgency that spoke louder than words. The woman's grip on Sophie's arm tightened. "She's just shy," she insisted, a nervous chuckle escaping her lips. "I told you, Keanu raised a hand, cutting her off. "Then let her answer for herself." The woman's expression flickered for just a moment before she laughed again, forced and uneasy. Keanu wasn't buying it. Every nerve in his body screamed that something was wrong, that this wasn't just an overprotective relative trying to retrieve a lost child. He turned his head slightly, scanning the parking lot. A few people walked past, glancing in their direction, but ultimately minding their own business. If he made a wrong move, if this woman really was who she said she was, he could be making a massive mistake. But if he walked away, Sophie might not get another chance. Keanu wasn't willing to take that risk. "All right," he said, straightening to his full height, his presence towering over the woman. "If she's lost, we should take her inside to the store's security. They can help confirm her parents' information and make sure everything is okay." The woman's smile faltered. barely for a second before she recovered. "That won't be necessary," she said quickly, tugging at Sophie's arm, but the girl yelped. Soft, but unmistakable. Keanu's jaw tightened. "I think it is," he said, his voice losing its softness. The woman sighed, exasperated. "Look, Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone shifting, her words now clipped and defensive. "I know who you are and I appreciate your concern, but I don't need a celebrity interfering in my personal family matters." "Funny," Keanu said, unmoving, "because I don't think she needs a stranger interfering in hers." The woman's smile was gone now. Her eyes darted around the parking lot, scanning for something, someone, escape. Her fingers twitched at her sides, and Keanu realized she was growing more desperate. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Then, like a switch had flipped, the woman changed tactics. She let out a loud, forced laugh and waved her hand dismissively. Fine, let's go inside. We can talk to security." Keanu studied her. It was too easy. He didn't trust it. He took a step forward, placing a protective hand on Sophie's shoulder. The little girl flinched slightly, but she stayed close to him, as if instinctively sensing safety. "You go ahead," Keanu said. "I'll follow." The woman's eye twitched. Just barely. And then, without warning, she moved. Her hand shot out, yanking Sophie's wrist with brutal force. The little girl cried out, stumbling forward as the woman spun on her heel and started dragging her away, fast. Keanu didn't think, he reacted. In 2 long strides, he reached them, his hand latching onto the woman's wrist. "Let her go," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The woman twisted, her free hand flying up, nails aiming for his face. Keanu dodged, his grip tightening just enough to hold her in place without hurting her. She shrieked. A wild, ear-piercing sound. "Help! He's attacking me!" Heads turned, people stopped. Keanu knew exactly what she was doing. He had seen enough of the world to recognize manipulation when he saw it. The woman was playing the victim, flipping the narrative in a desperate bid to turn public opinion against him. If he wasn't careful, he'd be the one looking like the villain here. A security guard from the store was already jogging over, hand resting on the radio strapped to his belt. "Sir, what's going on here?" the guard asked, his gaze flicking between them. Keanu released the woman's wrist, stepping back with his hands up. "This woman is trying to abduct this child," he said calmly, but firmly. The woman gasped, clutching her wrist as if he had broken it. "That's ridiculous," she shrieked. "He grabbed me. A small, trembling voice cut through the noise. "She's lying." It was Sophie. She barely whispered it, but the impact was like a bomb. The security guard's eyes narrowed. "Miss, is this your guardian?" he asked Sophie gently. Sophie shook her head, clutching Keanu's arm. The guard's face darkened. "All right, I'm calling the police." The woman's expression flickered, fear, frustration, and then pure malice. She took one slow step back, then another. Keanu saw it before she made her move. She turned and bolted. "Stop her!" the guard shouted. Keanu didn't hesitate. He took off after her, his legs carrying him faster than she could ever hope to run. She weaved between parked cars, frantically glancing over her shoulder, but Keanu was faster. She made it halfway across the lot before he caught up, stepping in front of her and cutting off her escape. She skidded to a stop, panting, her chest heaving. Keanu took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman's eyes darted around, as if looking for another way out, but there was none. Then, she did something unexpected. She smiled. "Wouldn't you like to know?" she said, her voice dripping with mockery. A siren wailed in the distance. The woman's smile vanished. She lunged at him. Keanu sidestepped, grabbing her wrist as she tried to strike him. He twisted just enough to immobilize her, holding her in place as she thrashed and screamed, spitting curses at him. Moments later, red and blue lights flooded the parking lot. The police arrived. 2 officers jumped out, one immediately moving toward Keanu and the woman. "Let her go, sir," one of them instructed, reaching for his handcuffs. Keanu released his grip, stepping back as the officers took over. "She tried to take a child," Keanu said. "The little girl in the pink dress. She told me herself." One of the officers nodded, turning toward the store entrance where Sophie stood, clinging to the security guard. Her mother arrived just as the officers approached. The moment Sophie saw her, she ran, her tiny legs carrying her straight into her mother's waiting arms. The woman sobbed, holding her daughter so tightly that it seemed as if she never wanted to let go. Keanu exhaled, the tension finally leaving his body. The officers hauled the blonde woman to her feet, cuffing her hands behind her back. "We've been looking for you," one of them muttered. Keanu's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" The officer sighed. "She's been involved in multiple attempted child abductions. We've had reports of her operating in shopping centers, trying to lure kids away. But this time, she got caught." Keanu glanced towards Sophie, who was still holding on to her mother. The woman, Sophie's mother, lifted her head and locked eyes with Keanu. There were tears in her eyes, but beneath them was something else. Gratitude. She mouthed two simple words. "Thank you." Keanu gave her a small nod before turning back toward the police, watching as they escorted the woman into the back of the squad car. He didn't know who she was, he didn't know what her plan had been, but none of it mattered now because Sophie was safe and that was all that mattered. Keanu stood still for a moment, his heart still pounding in his chest as the officers secured the suspect inside the squad car. The parking lot, once filled with tense silence and hurried movement, had now settled into a strange stillness. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional beep of a car unlocking were the only sounds that remained. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck as he watched Sophie nestled in her mother's embrace. The little girl's tiny hands were clutched so tightly around her mother's shirt that her knuckles had turned white. She wasn't crying anymore, but she was still shaking. Keanu knew that fear wouldn't go away overnight. The officer who had spoken earlier approached him again. "Mr. Reeves, would you mind giving a formal statement? We just need you to confirm everything you witnessed." Keanu nodded, glancing toward Sophie and her mother. They were talking to another officer now, the mother speaking in hushed tones while Sophie clung to her, looking exhausted. "Of course," Keanu said. The officer led him to the side where another officer had a notepad and pen ready. The process was familiar. Keanu had played enough law enforcement roles in films to understand the drill. But this was real, and in reality, it felt heavier. As he recounted the incident, he noticed something unsettling. The officer listening to him kept glancing toward the suspect in the back of the squad car. The woman no longer looked panicked. In fact, she wasn't resisting anymore. She was sitting there, calm and composed, staring straight ahead. That wasn't normal. Keanu followed the officer's gaze, studying her through the police car's tinted windows. The way she held herself, so unnervingly still, so eerily unbothered, sent a shiver down his spine. Something didn't add up. "Does she have an ID on her?" Keanu asked. The officer flipped through a small notebook, shaking his head. "Nothing so far. No purse, no wallet, no phone. If she hadn't started yelling, claiming you attacked her, we might have assumed she was just another shopper." Keanu narrowed his eyes. That was odd. Even people who planned crimes usually carried something with them. Fake IDs, burner phones, something. "So she just walked into a supermarket, empty-handed, and tried to take a child?" Keanu asked. "That doesn't sound random." The officer hesitated before responding. "No, it doesn't." That uneasy feeling in Keanu's gut grew stronger. He turned to look back at Sophie and her mother. They were still talking to the police, but now Sophie had lifted her head. She wasn't crying anymore, she was watching Keanu. Then, ever so slightly, she waved. Keanu smiled, giving her a small nod in return. It was a simple gesture, but something about it made his chest tighten. The officer continued, flipping through his notes. "We're running her prints through the database. If she's been involved in anything before, we'll find out soon." Keanu's jaw tightened. "And if she hasn't?" The officer hesitated. "Then she's either never been caught or... this is bigger than we think." Keanu didn't like that answer. Another officer jogged over, holding a radio in one hand. He looked tense. "We got something." The first officer straightened. "What is it?" Her fingerprints flagged a match, but not in a way we expected. The officer glanced at Keanu before lowering his voice. "She's listed as deceased." Keanu's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" The officer nodded grimly. The system pulled up a match for a woman with her prints, but according to official records, she died 5 years ago. Keanu felt a chill crawl up his spine. The first officer frowned, rubbing his jaw. Could be an error in the system. Or, Keanu said, voice low, she's been using someone else's identity. The officers exchanged looks. If that's the case, the first officer said, we're dealing with someone who knows how to stay hidden. Keanu turned back toward the squad car. The woman was still sitting there, motionless, but this time she was looking right at him. Their eyes met through the glass, and she smiled. It was slow, deliberate, and unsettling. Keanu felt his stomach twist. That wasn't the smile of someone who had just been caught. It was the smile of someone who knew something he didn't. She wasn't panicked, she wasn't afraid. She was waiting. For what? Keanu turned back to the officers. You're keeping her in custody, right? Absolutely, the officer confirmed. She'll be booked at the station, and we'll get more information once we process her fully. Keanu nodded, but that bad feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right. He turned back towards Sophie and her mother just as another car pulled up, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. It came to a smooth stop near the edge of the parking lot, its engine humming quietly. Keanu's instincts flared again. He had spent decades in the film industry, and he had encountered his fair share of unsettling situations. But this was different. Something about that car put him on edge. He wasn't the only one who noticed. One of the officers standing nearby caught sight of it too. Anyone call for another unit? He asked, glancing toward his partner. The second officer shook his head. No. The first officer frowned. Then who the hell is that? Keanu watched as the sedan's back door slowly opened. A man stepped out. Tall, dark suit, sunglasses. Even though the sun had already dipped below the horizon, he moved with purpose, his posture upright, controlled. Keanu recognized that type immediately. Not police, not a random passerby, someone with power. And whoever he was, he wasn't here by accident. The officer nearest to Keanu put a hand on his belt, inching slightly toward the car. Sir, this is a restricted scene. You can't be here. The man didn't respond right away. He adjusted his sunglasses, tilting his head ever so slightly in Keanu's direction. Then, finally, he spoke. We're here for the girl. The words sent ice through Keanu's veins. Sophie? The mother tensed, pulling her daughter closer. Who are you? She demanded. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing an identification badge. The officer stepped forward, squinting at it. FBI? The man gave a curt nod. The officer hesitated. We didn't receive any notice about federal involvement. You weren't supposed to, the man replied. Keanu took a step closer. Why are you here for Sophie? The man turned toward him, expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. We have reason to believe this incident is connected to an ongoing investigation. What kind of investigation? The officer asked, arms crossed. The man's jaw tensed. That's classified. The tension in the air thickened. The mother tightened her hold on Sophie, her voice shaking. No, I'm not letting her go anywhere. I don't care who you are. The agent, or whoever he really was, didn't argue. He simply closed his wallet and adjusted his suit cuffs. You misunderstand, he said smoothly. We're not here to take her. Keanu narrowed his eyes. Then why are you here? The man turned his head slightly, looking toward the police car where the blonde woman sat. We're here for her. The suspect, the woman, the one who had just smiled at Keanu like she knew this was coming. The officer looked skeptical. And why exactly does the FBI want custody of a kidnapper? The man exhaled slowly, then said something that made Keanu's blood run cold. Because she's not just a kidnapper, the mother inhaled sharply. Keanu clenched his fists. The man's next words sent a ripple of unease through everyone present. She's part of something bigger. For the first time since this all started, Keanu realized he wasn't just dealing with a lone criminal. This was something much, much larger, and Sophie had just escaped the center of it. Keanu felt the weight of the agent's words settle over him, like a storm cloud. The air around them seemed to shift, heavy with something unspoken, something dark lurking just beneath the surface. The suspect, the woman who had tried to take Sophie, sat motionless in the back of the squad car, her eerie calmness more unsettling than if she had been panicked or angry. She had known this was coming. Keanu had dealt with villains before, on screen at least. But in real life, this was different. This was real. The officer closest to the agent folded his arms, his skepticism evident. "You're going to have to give us more than that. Who exactly is she?" The agent exhaled through his nose, as if debating how much to reveal. He turned his head slightly, scanning the parking lot before lowering his voice. "She's connected to an international network of child traffickers." A chill ran down Keanu's spine. Sophie's mother let out a small gasp, clutching her daughter protectively. "Oh my God," she whispered, pulling Sophie against her chest. "You're saying she's done this before?" The agent nodded. Just her. There are others. We've been tracking this operation for months. Children have been disappearing across multiple cities, supermarkets, shopping malls, playgrounds, but we could never catch anyone in the act. They work in pairs, sometimes in groups, and they're incredibly careful. The moment we get close, they vanish. Keanu looked toward the squad car. The woman sat eerily still, eyes forward, lips barely curled in what might have been amusement. It was as if she was waiting to see what they would do next. "He's not scared," Keanu muttered, mostly to himself. The agent gave him a sidelong glance. "No, she's not, because she knows we're too late." Keanu turned sharply toward him. "Too late for what?" The agent hesitated, then gestured toward the officers. "Get the girl and her mother somewhere safe. Now." One of the officers blinked. "What? She's safe now." The agent's jaw tightened. "No, she's not." At that moment, a sharp click echoed from the squad car. It was soft, barely noticeable, but Keanu's ears picked it up instantly. The woman inside had moved for the first time in minutes. She wasn't struggling, she wasn't fighting, she was pressing something. A second later, the low rumble of an engine flared to life somewhere in the distance. Keanu's instincts flared, his body moving before his mind could process the danger. "Get down!" he shouted. The officers barely had time to react before the screech of tires tore through the parking lot. A black SUV identical to the agent's sedan came barreling toward them from the far side of the lot, accelerating at an alarming speed. Keanu grabbed Sophie's mother, pushing her toward the nearest cover. "Move!" The police officers scrambled, drawing their weapons as the vehicle sped closer, its headlights cutting through the darkening lot like twin daggers. The agent spun toward the approaching SUV, his face darkening. "They're here." Keanu's heart pounded as he shielded Sophie and her mother behind a parked car. Sophie was trembling, her tiny fingers digging into his jacket. The SUV didn't slow down. Two more officers drew their firearms, shouting at the driver to stop. The driver didn't listen. The moment stretched into something surreal, time slowing down as Keanu's mind raced. The woman in the squad car had triggered something. This wasn't just a botched kidnapping. This was a planned extraction. They weren't trying to rescue her, they were trying to silence her. The SUV swerved sharply, tires skidding against the pavement, and then, gunfire! A single shot rang out. The windshield of the SUV exploded, spiderweb cracks spreading across the glass. The driver lost control. The SUV jerked violently to the side, its tires screeching as it slammed into a parked car. For a moment, there was silence. Then, movement. The passenger door flew open, and a man dressed in dark clothing leaped out, his face obscured by a hood. He wasn't running, he was coming straight for the squad car. Keanu moved on instinct. He stepped forward, blocking the man's path. The man hesitated barely for a second before reaching into his jacket. Keanu didn't give him the chance. With years of training embedded in his muscle memory, he reacted. His hand shot forward, grabbing the man's wrist before he could draw his weapon. A struggle ensued. A brief, brutal exchange of force. The man was fast, but Keanu was faster. With a sharp twist, he disarmed him, sending the gun clattering to the ground. The man staggered back, eyes wide. He hadn't expected resistance, and that hesitation cost him. The agent seized the opportunity, tackling the man to the pavement and pinning him down. "Stay down," the agent growled, shoving a knee into the man's back. The officers moved in, securing the suspect with handcuffs. Keanu turned back to the squad car. The woman was still there, but she was no longer smiling. For the first time, Keanu saw something flicker across her face. Fear. The agent exhaled, standing up. "We need to get her out of here before more of them come." One of the officers turned toward him. "You think there are more?" The agent didn't answer. but his silence said everything. Keanu turned to Sophie and her mother. They were still huddled together, shaken but unharmed. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Sophie nodded slowly, her eyes wide, her small hands still gripping her mother's shirt. Keanu looked at the agent. "Where do we go from here?" The agent glanced toward the squad car, then toward the fallen attacker. "This isn't over," he said. "Not by a long shot." Keanu's jaw tightened. He had known, deep down, that something about this didn't feel like an isolated incident. Sophie wasn't just a random target, and the woman in the squad car wasn't just another criminal. There was something bigger happening. And now, Keanu was right in the middle of it. As more sirens filled the air, backup arriving to secure the scene, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to walk away from this. Not yet. Not until he found out exactly who these people were, and why they had been after Sophie in the first place. Keanu exhaled, his hands resting on his hips as he scanned the chaotic scene before him. The flashing red and blue lights painted the parking lot in an eerie, rhythmic glow. The officers were rounding up the second suspect, shoving him into another squad car. Sophie and her mother remained near the agent's vehicle, a protective officer standing guard beside them. The woman in the original squad car, the one who had orchestrated the entire abduction attempt, had lost the composure she held so steadily before. She now sat motionless, her fingers twitching slightly, her eyes darting between the agent and Keanu. She was studying them. Keanu could feel it. The agent seemed to notice it too. He turned to the lead officer, his voice low and urgent. "I want her taken to a secure location, no leaks, no outside interference. If this operation is as big as I think it is, there will be more coming." The officer gave him a hard look. "We'll do our job, but if the FBI is involved, I need to know how deep this goes." The agent hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Deep enough that if we don't act fast, she won't be the last target." Keanu frowned. "You're saying they'll try again?" The agent turned to him. "Not just Sophie, other children. If she's connected to the network we think she is, they won't stop because we stopped one attempt." Keanu clenched his fists, the weight of those words settling in his chest. He had been in the wrong place at the right time tonight. But how many other times had no one been there? How many times had a child been taken, their fate sealed in silence? The officer finally nodded. "We'll get her transport to a high second unit for questioning. But if you're right, we're going to need more than just a couple of patrol units watching our backs." The agent turned toward his car and motioned for Sophie and her mother to come forward. Sophie hesitated, still gripping her mother's hand tightly. The little girl's gaze flickered to Keanu, and for the first time, she spoke in something louder than a whisper. "Is it over?" Keanu's heart clenched at the uncertainty in her voice. He crouched down to meet her eye level. "For now," he said gently. "But we're going to make sure you're safe, okay?" Sophie nodded, though her tiny fingers still clung to the fabric of her mother's sweater. The agent pulled out a small device from his pocket, tapping through something on the screen before turning to Sophie's mother. "I need you both to come with me," he said. "There's a safe house where you'll be protected until we know more." The mother swallowed hard, fear still evident in her expression. "Why would they come after us again? She's just a child." The agent exhaled. "Because she saw too much. Because they lost her. And because, to them, she's unfinished business." The mother paled, holding Sophie even closer. Keanu's gut twisted at the thought. These people weren't just criminals. They were predators who saw children as nothing more than commodities, assets that could be acquired and discarded at will. And now, Sophie had slipped through their fingers. That made her dangerous. To them, the agent turned to Keanu. "You should get home, Mr. Reeves. You've already done more than anyone could have asked." Keanu met the man's gaze, reading between the lines. The agent wanted him out of this, to step back before he got too deep. Keanu considered it, then dismissed the thought entirely. He straightened. "Not happening." The agent raised an eyebrow. "This isn't your fight." "It is now." The agent studied him for a long moment before sighing. "I had a feeling you'd say that." He rubbed his temple. "Fine, but if you're in, you follow my lead." Keanu nodded. "Deal." The agent turned to one of the officers. Get them secured in the car. I'll meet you at the safe house after I handle a few things here. The officer nodded, guiding Sophie and her mother toward the waiting vehicle. Sophie glanced over her shoulder one last time at Keanu, offering a small wave. He smiled. Stay brave, kid. She hesitated, then nodded, as if taking his words to heart. As the car pulled away, Keanu turned back to the agent. All right. What now? The agent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone, checking a message that had just come through. His face darkened. They know she's alive. Keanu frowned. How? The agent's voice was clipped, tense. There's been movement. We have eyes on a few locations connected to this network, and they've just gone dark. That only happens when they know they've been compromised. Keanu's stomach dropped. So they're covering their tracks. Exactly. The agent looked at the police officers still at the scene. We need to move, now. Keanu followed him toward his car. Where are we going? The agent got into the driver's seat, motioning for Keanu to get in. We're going to find out who these people really are. The drive was silent, tension thick in the air. Keanu stared out the window, watching as the city lights flickered past. The agent's car wasn't marked, but it was clearly built for more than just casual transportation. The dashboard had a built-in GPS system that wasn't standard, and there were multiple encrypted devices in the center console. How long have you been tracking them? Keanu finally asked. The agent didn't take his eyes off the road. 18 months. Every time we think we have them cornered, they disappear. Until tonight. Keanu nodded slowly. And now they know they're exposed. The agent's grip on the wheel tightened. Which means they'll either run or retaliate. Keanu exhaled. He had stepped into something bigger than he ever imagined. He had only wanted to help a scared little girl, to do what was right in the moment. But now, the moment had become something else entirely. This wasn't just a one-time incident, this was a war. And he wasn't walking away from it, not now, not when there were others still out there, waiting, hoping, desperate for someone to save them before it was too late. Keanu didn't know what was waiting for him at the end of this road, but he was ready to find out. Want more? Check out the video on screen for another amazing story and hit subscribe to stay updated with our newest content.